Nick Bryant is an investigative journalist centering his coverage around disadvantaged children across the United States. He's had his works published in many national journals. He's also written a book about the issues impoverished children in the United States experience titled America's Children: Triumph of Tragedy.
My name is Nick Bryant. I'm an author. I live in New York City, and I am the author of The Franklin Scandal. The Franklin Scandal is about an interstate pedophile network whose epicenter was Omaha, Nebraska, and it flew kids around the country, primarily to Washington, D.C.
So I know that must sound like a lot. Let's rewind, specifically to 1982, and look at the first huge financial failure of Nebraska in the 1980s, the Commonwealth Savings Scandal. Nebraska was in economic turmoil throughout the 1980s when Bob Kerrey was elected governor of Nebraska in 1982. He had to take on the Commonwealth Savings Scandal. Former Lincoln Mayor and State Senator Don Wesley was a member of the legislature during this era.
When industrial savings loan, they were called, there was one called State Securities and one called Commonwealth, and they had gotten involved with some risky housing investments.
The Franklin Credit Union began on December 31st, 1968. It was set up to make loans and financial opportunities more available to the black community of North Omaha. Lawrence E. King Jr. became the manager of the credit union in 1973. He had the responsibility of resuscitating the already failing credit union and succeeded. King's measly income of just over $17,000 a year became questionable when looking at how he paraded himself around town. His wealth began to show as he drove around Omaha in nicer cars, bedazzled with jewelry, fur coats, and multiple houses, including one in Washington, D.C. that was reported to cost $5,000 a month for rent. King became a large donor to the Republican Party and became the vice chairman of the National Black Republican Council. He sang the Star-Spangled Banner at the 1984 Republican National Convention, after which he held an after-party at the ranch used for the show Dallas. This party included high-level Republican Party members including Ronald Reagan's daughter, Maureen Reagan. According to King, he claimed he was a personal friend of President George H.W. Bush. In the Franklin Committee's final report, they mentioned King's fame in Omaha. Franklin's president, Larry King, was a highly regarded local personality with substantial political connections, which in circuitous routes reached to the White House. He was pictured with presidents and other prominent politicians. Prominent local leaders were on the board of the Franklin Credit Union. The Franklin Credit Union was raided by the FBI and the Omaha Police Department on November 5, 1988. All files and documents were taken immediately. This was due to the fact that the credit union hadn't been audited since 1983. By December 11th of 1988, $34 million worth of funds from the credit union were found to be spent by Lawrence King on many expensive items. Some of the items listed include $29,512 for Borsheim's, $148,375 for the Old Market Limousine, $70,475 for Floral Concepts, a flower shop which King supplied King's restaurants, Cafe Carnival, catering companies, hotels, clothing stores, liquor, political groups, security services, and even more expenses are mentioned. Financial impropriety wasn't the only subject being spoken about. Sexual abuse allegations had been mentioned by children and reported to the Foster Care Review Board of Nebraska and the Omaha Police Department. No official investigation had been started by OPD or the FBI. Nebraska legislature members saw the failure of the credit union as a crisis and decided an investigation was needed. On January 11, 1989, the Nebraska legislature voted unanimously on LB 5, a motion to begin the Franklin Investigative Committee and to allocate $100,000 for the committee's operations. The original 7-member panel of the committee was made up of Loren Schmidt of Bellwood, who was the chairman, Ernie Chambers of Omaha, who was the vice chairman of the committee, the rest being Bernice Labeds and Dane Lynch of Omaha, Jim McFarland of Lincoln, Dennis Bach of Kimball, and Jerome Warner of Waverly. On the day the committee was voted on, Schmidt received a call on the floor of the legislature.
I received a phone call on the floor of the legislature. The caller did not identify himself, but he said, "Loren, you do not want to have an investigation of the Franklin Federal Credit Union." And I asked who I was speaking to, and they said, "That doesn't matter, but you shouldn't have that investigation." And I said, "Well, why not?" He said, "It will reach to the highest levels of the Republican Party, and we're both good Republicans."
I didn't know much. I think I would represent most of the members of the legislature, that it was all like some story that we weren't that familiar with, but we kept hearing about it. And the people in Omaha that kind of knew the players, so the Omaha senators were much more, I think, knowledgeable about what was going on and had heard the rumors. We heard them all second and third hand, and so not much, just enough to know that something wasn't right up there.
Loren was he was head of the Franklin Committee, and he took a lot of heat. He had a lot of threats.
The committee setup was a long process. Trying to find the correct investigator for this web of intrigue would require someone with great investigative experience. For special counsel, the committee appointed Lincoln lawyer Kirk Naylor on February 6th of 1989. Chambers and Schmidt had immediate conflict for how to engage with the committee. Schmidt wanted to follow the money trail, while Chambers wished to look more into the sexual abuse allegations. This fundamental difference in how the committee was meant to be run had implications for what happened in the near future. The committee immediately found difficulty in obtaining records of the credit union in Lawrence King. Nebraska Attorney General Robert Spire blocked the release of these documents to the committee for many months. Naylor and Special Investigator Jerry Lowe quit the committee on the same day in July of 1989. Chambers quit a week after that. He and Naylor both were disgruntled with Schmidt's comments surrounding the investigation, claiming the sexual abuse allegations weren't verifiable and that it's best the committee follow the money trail. Senator Chambers said the committee had become a hoax and a sham that might intentionally or inadvertently be a cover-up for people during an interview on KETV Channel 7. John Stevens Berry, a local Lincoln lawyer, was chosen as temporary counsel for the committee on July 17, 1989. Berry's law firm successfully negotiated with Spire, the Nebraska Attorney General, to finally allow the committee's access to the reports and the financial records of Larry King and the Franklin Credit Union in late September 1989. Berry also did one more thing. He recommended to the committee to appoint Lincoln private investigator Gary Caradori to be the lead investigator of the committee. Caradori was an investigator and CEO of private Lincoln-based investigative company called Caracorp Inc. On August 16, 1989, Caradori was tentatively hired by the committee. He began to make leads and noise with his commitment to investigating the sexual abuse stories. Secrecy was optimal for the committee's progress, according to Don Wesley.
When we hired Mr. Caradori, I was very specific to him. I said, "We do not want you to bring to the committee rumors, innuendos, nothing that cannot be backed up with facts." I said, "Bring to the committee that which we can take to a prosecutor."
Caradori had two separate investigations occurring. One with the money trail, which included sifting through documents and having the committee issue subpoenas. The other was the sexual abuse allegations. His appointment reestablished the committee interest to continue further into the child sexual abuse allegations.
The Franklin Committee was dedicated to outing this pedophile network, and the federal government and the state government and the local government were dedicated to covering it up. So the Nebraska subcommittee, the Nebraska Senate subcommittee, unicameral subcommittee, just didn't have the power to go up against the people that they went up against.
Caradori continued to find more leads. He learned about Omaha World Herald columnist Peter Citrin and his sexual exploitation of children. Citrin was eventually indicted with child sexual abuse charges and sentenced to prison. He was linked with Lawrence King and worked under Harold Anderson, editor-in-chief at the World Herald. Anderson is brought up multiple times in Nick Bryan's book as a pedophile. Anderson had multiple connections to the Franklin Credit Union and Lawrence King, with him being on the board of the credit union and fundraising for the credit union.
The kids he liked were mainly around the age of probably about 8 and 13. It was mainly fondling and oral sex with them. He did have some anal sex, but he usually did that with the older kids.
Bryant believes the media's role made for certain the investigation would be negated, especially the victims such as Alicia Owen.
Well, Omaha World Herald did a hatchet job on the Franklin Committee and also on the victims, and Harold Anderson was the publisher of the Franklin Herald. He was also one of the pedophiles. He liked, he had an affinity for little boys. But then the national media also played a role in covering this up. The New York Times played a role in covering it up. The Washington Post played a role in covering it up. CBS's 48 Hours played a role in covering it up. And also GQ came out with a real hit piece on Lawrence Schmidt and Alicia Owen and anyone else that believed the children. So the Senate committee was not only going up against federal law enforcement, but they were going up against the entire media.
Caradori conducted interviews with some of the victims. Paul Bonacci, Alicia Owen, Troy Boner, and Danny King each discussed the traumas they encountered and the people who were present at said parties.
They had some other guy came in and we didn't even know about it. And Nicholas didn't know what was going to go on next. This guy came in and he started kicking the shit out of Nicholas and he started trying to kick the shit out of me.
The whole time that this was going on, he was talking, and he said that he knew that I wasn't a virgin anymore. And
how did he know that?
I don't know how he knew that. That's why I think that what happened that night was supposed to happen that night, the night that I lost my virginity.
Lawrence King often hosted and presented these parties at multiple locations around Omaha and Washington, D.C. King had a confidant in Craig Spence, a D.C. insider who had links to the CIA, according to Nick Bryant.
Because this was in a state-affiliated pedophile network, and what I mean by state-affiliated, there were people, some of the people in this pedophile network were connected to powerful people, and there was blackmail going on. And in Washington, D.C., there were two primary pimps, Lawrence C. King and Craig Spence. And Craig Spence was a CIA asset, and he was definitely had a house that was rated for audiovisual blackmail.
Larry King's house down in Washington, D.C. was a nice house. It was on what they, I believe it was Embassy Row, because that's what they kept talking about. There were a lot of flags from different countries when you drove around in the area.
So tell me, Paul, how often did you come here?
I was about 14, about 1981, and at first it was about 3 or 4 times the first year. After that, it was about once a month after 81.
Who brought you here?
Larry King brought me here.
Caradori was set to meet Rusty Nelson in Chicago on July 10, 1990. Nelson, a photographer who worked for Lawrence King and who actually lived in his condo at the Twin Towers in Omaha for a few months, had agreed to give photos for sexual blackmail to Caradori in Chicago. Caradori brought his son AJ for the MLB All-Star game that was occurring in Chicago. Caradori, who is a pilot, flew his son the day of the game. While flying back from Chicago, the plane crashed into a farm field in rural Illinois at roughly 2:30 a.m.
It broke up over Lee County, Illinois, spread out over 1,800 feet or something along that line. So the plane obviously exploded. Although the National Transportation Safety Board said that the plane went into a dive and Gary Caradori was sleeping, and the plane went into a dive, and then it broke apart that way. So, but it's not very credible.
No.
And then there's many anomalies involved in that plane crash, which I get into in the book.
Gary there was one piece of evidence I know he got that he even said he got one step ahead of him this time. He told us about this book. It was like addresses, telephone numbers, names. He said if they knew he had it, they'd kill him.
Caradori's death was a strong warning to the committee and Loren Schmidt.
Well, the Caradori stuff, and how I think it was Loren that he said he had the information, he was going to be bringing it to him, and you won't believe what I found out. And then he, died. And so I know Loren was really shook up about it. So I remember talking to him. I mean, I don't know if he was scared or just shook, probably is the better way to describe it. So, I mean, you have that happen, and then you worry about, is there going to be something in my car, or something happened to me. So it was a scary time.
The committee appointed former CIA Director William Colby to investigate the plane crash. He was originally considered to become the lead investigator of the committee, but was narrowly voted down due to his political baggage.
The Franklin Committee hired William Colby to investigate Gary Caradori's death. And William Colby told some people, he never said this publicly, but he did tell Loren Schmidt, I believe, and also some other people that were affiliated with the Franklin Committee, that Gary Caradori's death had in fact been an assassination.
Grand juries were held right after Caradori's demise. The first grand jury in July of 1990 centered around the child abuse allegations. It was held at the Douglas County Courthouse. The grand jury declared the child abuse allegations were a carefully crafted hoax. The grand jury didn't identify the perpetrators of the hoax. Two of the victims that didn't recant their testimonies, Alicia Owen and Paul Bonacci, were indicted on perjury charges. Owen served 4.5 years of her 9 to 15-year sentence.
It has shaken my faith in the institutions of government. I used to be a firm believer that the system would work, and that people who did things wrong would be punished. And we discovered victims who claimed to have been abused and who the grand jury acknowledged had been abused. But they did not try to find out who had abused those individuals. Instead, they convicted Alicia Owen of perjury. Indefensible from my point of view.
And yet, there seems to be an awful lot that points that something was happening. And what that something is, I don't know. But, and again, turning it around on the witnesses like that, I mean, there are people that feel passionately that those witnesses were telling the truth, and they were punished for telling the truth. And then there are others that say they were lying and harmed people of good reputation and ruined their reputations. I mean, there are two sides. I know they always say that about two issues, about any issue, but this one, I mean, this interview is bringing back, really, really crazy time. You were always concerned what was really happening. I'm not sure they ever got to the bottom of it. I know there's a couple books, a lot of things been investigated, and the grand jury. I don't know if we'll ever find the real answer to that.
Another grand jury was held in September of 1990, exonerating Lawrence King of being an interstate pedophilic pimp. In February of 1991, King was found guilty of his financial crimes and was sentenced for 15 years in federal prison. The new legislative session began in January of 1991 and ended the Franklin Committee unanimously. Don Wesley remarked on how the downfall of the committee was due to misinformation being rife.
There were all kinds of rumors, and I remember Lauren was pretty sure that was sabotage, and I think people were worried about what's really going on. What is happening here? It's like spinning out of control. So I think people were backing off of trying to go any further, because what would happen, and they were talking also about reputations of some people that were pretty well known, and I think the feeling was it was getting a little too hot for some people. He was scared, and he's a tough guy, so he doesn't scare easily. So yeah, we kept hearing about stuff. It was crazy. I mean, it was really an issue and a moment in time where it didn't seem possible. What was happening was almost like it was part of a movie script or something, and not good old conservative Nebraska.